This is Twit.
Google's 3-year antitrust probe that was brought on by European regulators may finally be over soon. The company had been accused of favoring its own products and its search results over its competitors' products. Competitors weren't real happy about that. Now, Reuters sources say that Google offered big concessions to the European Commission to settle once and for all. Previously, the Commission threatened Google with handing over 10% of its revenue from 2012, which could have amounted to about $5 billion.
With us to talk about Google's troubles in Europe is Marianne Russin, who is a technology reporter for the International Business Times in the UK. She's Skyping in from London. Marianne, welcome.
Hi there.
So I understand that the maximum penalty out of all of this, the worst case scenario for Google, is that they'll be fined somewhere around $5 billion. It's a little steep, isn't it?
It's quite a lot of money for them, so I would imagine that they would be quite keen to avoid that. The key thing about this is that they'd been making proposals all through last year, and it was only until about September that the Commission said, okay, this proposal might have something that we can work with, so we are willing to put this back on the table, but we still need you to make many, many, many more concessions. And in January, just about a couple of weeks ago, basically, Joaquin Almunia, who's the vice president of the European Commission, was basically saying in Brussels, Google, can you hurry up? We really, really want to be done with this. It's been going on for 3 years now. So you're either going to have to pay the fine or you really, really need to make those concessions.
Some people in the U.S. might think this sounds kind of familiar. There was a similar issue with the FTC in the U.S. that ended last year with little more than a reprimand towards Google. Companies like Yelp had said, hey, Google's bearing our results. Why is it so much more serious in the EU?
I think that the EU takes these issues very seriously. They take the way that they regulate all of their member states very, very seriously, often more seriously than the governments of some of these individual member states. For example, not talking about technology, there are quite a few issues that involve human rights, that go through the UK court, but then when they come to the European Court of Justice, suddenly it's then enforced. But they've always had quite a big stance on, fairness, particularly protecting European countries. Google's already gotten into trouble just in the UK with our government because it said that it was only engaging in advertising sales, and these were only happening in Ireland, which is the place that a lot of tech companies say because their tax rates are a bit lower. But obviously, in the UK, it technically meant they were avoiding paying that tax. So they've basically had to put aside about £24 million now after the MPs complained last year to pay that corporation tax.
That's fascinating. Normally I don't like to really cover antitrust type stories because it's kind of an abstraction to everyday users. But in this case, I think it brings up a really interesting point about the sort of catch-22 of the search engine racket, if you will. Essentially, Google is providing search links to everything, including its own company, its own services, its own products, its own websites, as well as the competitors, the companies that Google competes with. And this is the core issue that the EU is dealing with. Now, is a website, the question they're grappling with, is a website unpopular because Google is not ranking it well in the search engine? Or is Google not ranking it highly in the search engine because it's unpopular? How does a brand new company with no traffic, no mind share, rise on Google's search engine and compete against Google when they're not important enough to rise up? And how can they ever become a big company, a well-known company, if they don't rank in the search engine? Do you think the courts or the EU Commission is the right place for these kinds of issues to be decided?
I feel that the European Commission, perhaps in my sort of view, I'm a little bit more in the view of I feel that the UK government does not always do enough. In my opinion, these things do sometimes need to be taken to an EU state level to protect countries in the European Union. I mean, if you're going to talk about how companies can rank better on Google, well, Google would say, well, you need to have unique content. You need to be providing a product. You need to make sure you don't break any of our rules. And they've recently started downranking certain companies for not paying attention to those rules. And then, I suppose my own advice would be try not to advertise something that Google advertises. But in general, Google says if you play fair, your SEO is done properly, you are not breaking any of our rules, then we will rank you by importance and how closely what you're offering and how closely your website is optimized to what people are searching for. But on an issue whereby it affects the whole EU, there are 125 companies that complained to the European Commission about this issue, and they've been investigating for 3 years. I feel that this is something that has to be done at the EU level rather than going through each different member state.
Well, it's all very fascinating. I thank you so much for joining us. I know it's a little late in the evening there, so I really appreciate it. Thank you.
No problem.
You can find Marianne Russin on the International Business Times UK and also Twitter at Concertina226.